and one at 8 p.m. But
Good afternoon and welcome to 1 billion seconds to decarbonise. What is the investment community doing about it? Good afternoon. It's a lot. 1 billion seconds. What a background noise going on at the moment. Thank you. So here we are, nearing the end of the first day of Decarbonise Week, Virtual Sustainability Summit, a pre-COP event with some next month's milestone event sponsors, highly topical relevant panels. Director and creator of All Energy, 18 months has not been of in-person events, but a compelling series of webinars. 30 between May 2020 and March this year, which attained well over 18,000 registrations and more than 20,000 views. So here we are in Decarbonise Week. Just one tiny housekeeping point. Check out what lies behind your resources tab, audience members. You can see what's up next. Well, the answer is not till tomorrow morning. Find a full programme link, the digital bag, and information on next May's All Energy and Decarbonise. 11th and 12th of May at Glasgow's SEC, the vital things for your diary. Naturally, we'd like to thank our sponsors. And for the first 3 days, these include our brand sponsors, Scottish Power, Shepherd and Wedderburn, whose names you'll see alongside certain sessions close to their hearts. And our session sponsors, Hitachi ABB Power Grids, Kellis Midstream, SSEN Transmission, and SWEP. And also the organisation with the Drive Electric Revolution Industrial Centres. Thank you for being with us today. Your audience. If you enjoy the session, let us know. And you can watch on demand. I'd like to ask so much for putting together this thing. It's been me a good from back, and I'm going to pass over to him now and they
Thank you, Judith, for that excellent kind introduction. It's been my pleasure to put together the panel from a really exciting group that I'm working with called Financing Technology to Net Zero, who you can check out on LinkedIn under that name, but more about that in a minute or two. Just to say to everybody watching, please do engage and interact with the panel. We're really looking forward to answering your questions, and the panel is really absolutely stellar in its background, it's the variety of its knowledge. We'd really love to hear from you. That panel is made up of a group which includes the Scottish National Investment Bank, the bank. It includes Siemens Energy, Wood, Strategic Growth Services. It includes the Net Zero Technology Centre and the EIC, and we will come to them. We'll come to them shortly. What I would like to do first, though, is to introduce you to Mark Munro. Mark Munro is the executive director of the bank, and I've been chatting to him over the last couple of days. We have something a little in common in that in a past life I was performing a role not dissimilar to the one he and colleagues are now engaged with in terms of intervening in Scotland's economy in a positive way, looking for positive results. But there's no point in me telling you about what the bank does. That's exactly what Mark is here for. And for the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, we'd like just to hear from you, Mark, about exactly that. And perhaps we could start, Mark, with you just explaining for a couple of minutes what the bank is all about, Mark.
Sure, no, I'd be delighted to, Andrew, and thank you for having me on this afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here. The bank, so the bank is a publicly owned, mission-led investment bank, and I should say, sorry, thank you. We try and not refer to SNIB. My understanding is the connotations are that it's negative in terms of it's like locking a door, and the last thing the bank wants to do is to close the door or lock the door. So we do refer to the bank. The bank's established to offer long-term patient capital on commercial terms, and that's to projects and businesses that can potentially have sort of transformational impacts on the Scottish economy and Scottish society. The missions, they've been set by the Scottish Government following consultation, and then the bank is designed to operate independently from government. So the missions, which reflect sort of society's challenges, are, and this is in no ranking order, they each have the same weight, is support the transition to net zero, is to build communities and promote equality of opportunity through the Places mission. And we also have an innovation mission, and the innovation mission essentially is trying to create and support 21st century industries in Scotland. Given the audience today, I would think, but it's obviously not set, but the net zero and the innovation missions would most certainly be the most sort of aligned to the audience. In terms of being a commercial investor, the bank uses debt and equity. We can invest in both debt and equity. It's investments from sort of £1 million up to £50 million. And since inception in November 2021, the bank has invested just over £125 million. I think it's 126.5 to be accurate. In terms of what the bank's wanting to do and seeks to do is that's to be a catalyst for investment. That means we want to bring co-investors along with us. So there may be instances where the bank's required to invest first, and that's something we can do, where we can see a path to commerciality. We are a growth investor, as opposed to maybe VC, where we're not quite in the VC space. Ideally, we would see sort of operational establishment and ideally revenue generation. However, it's not to say it's hard and fast. Where there is that pathway to commerciality, we would like to begin the discussions. I'll expand on just a patient investor as well. The bank doesn't have any short-term time horizons which can sort of artificially create deadlines for investee companies. The time horizon that the bank would apply is up to 15 years. So there's no rush to exit investments, be it debt or equity. In project finance scenarios, there is an ability to extend that to 35 years. Obviously, that would reflect the cash flow of the project finance. Something I should say, so one thing we don't do, and that is we're not a grant agency, nor are we in competition with the private sector. So if you get a few quotes from the private sector and you think the pricing is too high, and the bank will be able to come along and offer cheaper money, unfortunately, that's not quite where we're at. We definitely want to work alongside the private sector. So crowd in rather than crowd out, as we say. And listen, that's been a feature of all our investments to date. For example, on M Squared lasers, the bank invested £12.5 million. And following that, Santander Bank provided £20 million of banking facilities. On R3 Internet of Things, the bank, of a total investment of 3.1, the bank was £1 million. We co-invested alongside the University of Strathclyde and Space Capital, I think it was as well. We can also act as a cornerstone investor. I touched on the point, the bank can go first if we need to, and then we can then crowd capital in behind us. On the Gresham House Forestry Fund, the bank was a cornerstone investor. And maybe just finally touch on state aid, given where the bank's funds sort of come from. There is a need for the bank's support to be identified. So what I'm getting in that point is maybe a gap has to be obvious. You know, we maybe had a funding round and there's a shortfall, or it may be that there's been no ability to access capital. That's just something that we need to be able to identify for later. Listen, that's a very short introduction to the bank, Andrew. I think I've covered off most of the main points.
Yeah, listen, Mark, that's been really, really helpful. Thank you. What I would say is that the outline you've given is very illuminating, I think, and I'm sure there'll be a queue of people with projects and business ideas at your door. I would urge them to think carefully about whether their idea, their project, their business actually fits in with that basic set of criteria, of course, so that they save themselves some time. I think one of the things people may find useful is to have a kind of typical process idea from you, from start to finish, and I'm very aware that every deal is different. So I'm not asking you to issue a blueprint. So every deal, it will be exactly like this. But just to give an idea of some of the procedures that you would typically go through when looking at a deal, I think people listening might find that quite helpful, Mark.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I'll maybe talk to our approval process and then sort of the stages that play into that. So obviously there'll be an initial inquiry, and we'll spend a little bit of time getting to know each other. So again, further education on the bank and understanding the businesses seeking investment. So we have a 4-stage investment approval process. The first stage of that is what's called sort of socialization. At that point, we're really assessing, is there mission alignment? So just to recap, that net zero, places, and innovation. So we ensure that there's mission alignment, and then we allocate resources on the back of that. So that first committee, I wouldn't say a green light, let's call it a red or amber is the best you would get. After that, we have the mission alignment and we've committed resources. We're then into the stage of if you like, the sort of bank's internal underwriting process, where we'll be working out, does it fit with appetite? What does work with appetite for our initial investment committee? And the output of that initial investment committee would be the sort of initial term sheet. It would reflect the point where we're now starting to discuss terms. Again, we're still not red, amber, green. We're more red or amber, I would suggest, at that second stage. And we move on to the third stage, which at the output would be the executive investment approval. At this sort of third stage, we're really undertaking the due diligence and we're digging deeper. So having come through our initial position, can we validate these positions or further understand the assumptions we made before? And as I say, back them up as we go to the executive investment committee. Once we're beyond that stage, we're really sort of ticking. It's a tick box in some ways. We're making sure that everything's sort of as we initially thought. Is it in line with the term sheet? Do the documents reflect that? Does the due diligence reflect it? And essentially, can we sign everything off? So once it's gone through our final investment committee, we're really at the stage of being able to disperse the funds. So we get the sign off, and we not quite that day, but very soon thereafter, the intention would be that we're in a position, as I say, to remit the funds, be it the debt or equity. I'm sure you're all wanting to ask, how long does this 4-stage process take? And I'm maybe going out on a limb here a little bit. So if you do come back and say to anyone, the bank will deny I actually said this. I would imagine in the best case scenario, we're looking at sort of maybe 6 to 8 weeks. However, I would say the average is likely to be double that. The key factor I would suggest in terms of driving the timeline, for as much as the bank plays a part, is actually more the investee companies and how prepared they are for that process. If all the information is available, if they're very clear in what it is they're asking for and what they'll accept as well, then that has a bearing on how long that time process will take.
Yeah, of course, and I understand that completely. and would stress that you've set out a typical deal, but there's there's no such thing. Every deal is different, but nevertheless, a really useful aid to those looking to engage with the bank. I guess one of the other questions that people may have who are listening is how Scottish does this have to be? With the bank being based in Scotland and its funds in principle coming from Scottish Government, as I understand it. You correct me if I'm wrong there. But to what extent are you looking for impacts within Scotland or businesses to be located in Scotland, etc.? And I think people will find it quite interesting to understand that dynamic.
Yeah, no, a couple of points, Andrew. I'll come back to impact. That's a very important word for us. I'll maybe touch on sort of the funding. The Scottish Government has committed to funding over 10 years, £2 billion worth of capital. The bank does also have a target to be financially self-sustainable, and that's something we're working towards as well. In addition to that, the bank is working towards FCA to become regulated by the FCA, and one of the key purposes of that will allow us to raise and invest third-party funds alongside those of the bank. So there's quite a few sort of tracks running on that, but for the moment, funded directly from the government. In terms of how Scottish does it need to be, it's not all saltires and thistles and shortbread. The missions reflect the challenges facing Scottish business and Scottish society, as I said, and that it's clear that that's where our mandate lies to invest. The impact, as you touched upon, is the impact of those missions is what will be measured against, and that's vital for us. So to have the greatest impact, we will invest in Scottish anchored businesses. So to expand on that further, that I would say, obviously there'll be, let's call it, Indigenous Scottish businesses, and that's quite straightforward. But also businesses with large Scottish presence is where we would look to work alongside as well. So that can be a large site or a large employer, or those looking to create a new footprint in Scotland. There's a discussion certainly to be had. And maybe the third area would be sort of Scottish export businesses. The home market, it doesn't need to be sort of Scottish home market. I think everyone would want to encourage exports, and the bank is very much aligned to encouraging exports as well.
Okay, well, listen, thanks very much for that. As we head into the panel session in a few minutes, before we do that, what I'd like to give you the opportunity to do is just maybe make one or two comments about those who are listening who might want to get in touch with the bank, and whether they be those companies who have a project they think might be of interest, or potentially they may be co-funders who themselves have projects where there is a gap, or even those who just want to be known to you. Clearly, you'll be well connected to other financial circles. But if that exists, then perhaps you could say a word or two about how they might engage with the bank in a good way.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Andrew. One thing I would say is we want to talk to as many stakeholders as we possibly can, be it those looking for investment, co-investors, financial institutions in terms of bank or debt lending, stakeholders generally, those special interests. So the bank certainly wants to engage us. There's some really impressive people within our engagement teams, and we do want to engage. I think we'll also acknowledge that there's a lot of different types of investors, and that's healthy. And we want to support that ecosystem. And as I say, the bank will work with all these different types of investors. Maybe where the chemistry will be the strongest, if you like, with the bank, will be those that are aligned with the missions, as well as investing responsibly. I'll give an example of those who sort of support the Scottish Business Pledge, for example. It's something that's key to the bank. So providing a living wage, addressing gender pay gaps, using zero-hour contracts appropriately. So So I'm trying not to exclude any in particular, but certainly the chemistry will be stronger with those where their investee companies apply these responsible approaches.
Yeah, excellent. And if I may say so, using my privileged position as chair, I mean, excellent use of the leverage you've got to try and get these basic equitable principles, if I can call them that, into your business relationships. Mark, listen, thank you very, very much. I certainly found that very interesting. I've been around the kind of Scottish scene for quite some time, and it's really useful to get a direct hands-on understanding of what the bank is seeking to do. Mark, I'd invite you to stay around now and join the panel that I'm about to introduce and to engage with us in that. What I'd like to do now is say a little bit about the upcoming panel. Some months ago, a guy who's now become a friend, I guess you would say a Zoom friend, because actually, as is the way, we've not actually met yet. John Young of Strategic Growth Services and I were on a panel together. I got a call after that, and he invited me to join a group that had already been established, which is called Financing Technology to Net Zero. And I joined. And it was described very recently as the best meeting of our respective weeks, for what it's worth. It's a pro bono group, and it's made up of people from Siemens Energy. It's made up of people from Wood, from Strategic Growth Services, from the Net Zero Technology Centre, from the EIC. What we are trying to do is acknowledge that there is a challenge in financing technologies that are going to be part of the picture to get us to net zero. And there seem to be challenges in achieving all of that. And we find that as a group quite frustrating. And we are working together to produce a white paper, and in doing so, engaging with the sectors, and we are endeavouring to get their feedback on these quite important issues. You can get a real good sense of what we're about by going on to the Financing Technology for Net Zero page on LinkedIn. Have a look for it. You can also find a link there to our survey, and I would encourage you to do that and to complete the survey. So what I'd like to do now is formally introduce the group. So we have Miranda Hochberg, who is an innovation consultant, probably the coolest name for a job I think I've ever heard, an innovation consultant with newly formed Siemens Energy. We have Keith Lawton, who is a strategic director for Wood. We have John Young of Strategic Growth Services. We have Myrtle Dawes of the Net Zero Technology Centre, which was formerly known as the OGTC. And we have Neil Golding of the EIC. And what I'd like to do with each of you, if I may, along with Mark, who we already know, is ask you for a couple of words as we start the panel on the challenges that we're looking at and your thoughts about that before we get into a conversation about it. And Miranda, what I'd like to do, if I may, start with you. If you can let us know what Siemens Energy think about this difficult challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for the invitation to join the panel. I think today I'm the only panelist who's not located in the UK, so greetings from foggy southern Germany. As Andrew said, I work for Siemens Energy. I spent 8 years working for Siemens AG until Siemens Energy was spun off of the mothership just last year. We had our 1-year birthday last week on September 28th. So on September 28th, 28th, 2020, we became a pure play energy company that was listed on the German stock exchange. And we did that to really be able to concentrate the might of our organization to really focusing on the energy transition with our entire portfolio. So as Andrew said, I have a really cool name in terms of my job description. I got to make that one up myself, so thank you for the compliment. I have had the privilege and honor of working with our incubator and ventures group over the last year to develop and grow our innovation movement within the company itself. So we call it Let's Innovate SE. And our goal, our mission is really to encourage all 90,000 of our employees, which is just a third of what we used to be when we were at Siemens AG, to engage with disruptive ideas that will grow new business, understanding that our current portfolio has to change dramatically to keep up with the trends of the energy transition in a changing world. And so what we try to do is create transparency and promote participation in the programs that we have available at the company, because we wholly believe that we have an amazing potential to harness the collective intelligence of all of us to innovate the energy system of tomorrow, as well as to help solve the challenges associated with climate change. So that's a little bit about what I'm doing and how the company sees these challenges.
Yeah, Miranda, thanks very much indeed for that. And yeah, I didn't know you had made up that your own title. Had I known that, I wouldn't have said anything at all, of course. So yeah, what I'd like to do now, Keith from Wood, is have you do the same, if you would. Just say a little bit about what Wood's doing in this new technology kind of innovation space and funding space, if you would.
Sure, of course. And thank you for having me, Andrew, and hi everyone. Yeah, so Keith Lawton, I work in Wood. I'm one of the strategic directors for our energy transition team. I guess, looking back, my heritage is actually in environment and regulation. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Environmental Management for my sins. But a lot of what my roots are technically goes back to climate. It goes back to biodiversity. It goes back to the natural world and how we use and link that natural world piece to our economic and social prosperity. And so issues around things like net zero, climate neutrality are, for me, indexed back to the natural world. And I guess really, really important. That's what drives me when we think about technology. Real innovations in things like biomimicry, learning how nature has adapted and how do we use the nature's design to actually drive some of this technology. But looking at Wood, we've been a technology-centered company for decades and decades and decades. We've had a consistent thread of technological innovation running through not just what we do, but what we partner with collaborators on. And I guess, this piece, when we started this conversation more almost a year ago now, this resonated for a number of reasons, not least because a lot of technology and technological ideas cross my desk, but also actually because the technological challenge, the puzzle, if you like, is one of those kind of pieces of the golden triangle to solve net zero challenge. And I guess that intricate challenge of how do you take a good idea and commercialize that to actually help it realize its potential is something that both we're working on and of extreme interest to the group more generally as finance into net zero. So yeah, I'm happy to engage and be delighted to be here.
Yeah, Keith, thanks very much. It's great to have businesses like Siemens Energy and Wood involved in a pro bono project like this. I have to say, it gives the whole thing the weight and reputation it needs to gain that essential interest in momentum. And what I'd like to do now is introduce you, John Young, Strategic Growth Services. My understanding being you founded that business, John, and it'd be great, I think, if you were able to tell us just a little about your background, because I think that's very relevant to what we're doing and what your view is on these problems that are in front of us.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for the invitation to join the event, to yourselves and to the organisers at All Energy. It's a shocking thought, isn't it, that it's only 1 billion seconds to go to net zero 2050, and you think how much we have to achieve in what appears to be a very short time frame. We set up strategic growth services almost 18 months ago now, with the remit really was to help businesses either grow into new regions outside their own existing areas, or indeed into new sectors. And that was mostly driven by the feedback that we'd received on how difficult it was for some companies to really visualize how they would progress through the energy transition, and some of the challenges that they faced when they developed some fantastic technology into getting acceptance and deployment. And again, we had this fantastic invitation by Siemens Energy, and Miranda, it was a year ago already,
In a week.
Where we all sat round this virtual table for the first time and talking about how do we work back from net zero, which I think remains a fantastic initiative, because the belief is that net zero is some way out in the future, 30 plus years beyond many of our careers, or certain, hopefully mine, but nevertheless so important to the future of our children and their children. And so this idea that working back to a point that we understand what we need to do tomorrow is hugely important, because if we just wait for 2020, 25 to take place, we're already too late. And indeed, part of what we did with the white paper and the fantastic presentation you gave, Andrew, at Offshore Europe, was a recognition that we are going to struggle to deliver on 2050 ambitions, which already is concerning. And the key challenge that we understood was this disconnect between the technology developers and providers. As Mark mentioned, these guys have to be prepared to present it in a certain way, which is not necessarily an obvious thing for technology developers, plus the financial institutions and the perception of risk within the financiers. So what our team has done is fantastic in trying to develop and close that gap to improve technology readiness levels that become more acceptable to the financiers. I'm really excited to be part of this. So I'm really keen to help.
Yeah, thanks very much, John. And we'll pick up some of the themes that you've mentioned in our discussion just in a few minutes, I hope. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Myrtle Dawes. Myrtle, who is a Solution Centre Director at Net Zero Technology Centre, a name which is relatively new for an organisation that's been around for a while, Myrtle. I would love to hear what you at the Net Zero Technology Centre are thinking about this challenge that's in front of us.
All right, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here as well, amongst all the other guests. So, from a personal perspective, I'm on the same transition journey that we see the companies on. I've spent nearly 30 years in oil and gas, and I've worked, offshore on projects, operations, and now find myself, because I wanted to, being able to work on something which is absolutely key, which is how are we going to, develop and deploy technology for an affordable energy transition. So, we know there's technology out there, but how are we going to get that affordable and really efficient? And, our mission at NZTC is helped by three things. So we're looking at enabling, which is the industry diversification, the accelerating, which is what is the technology, and we actually invest a lot in what I call nascent technologies, primarily between TRL, say 5, 6, all the way up to 8/9. But we do also invest in research and in entrepreneurial companies, and we also look to do a lot of work around the Inspire. That's about connecting academia, government, industry together, and really creating this culture of innovation. Because as per the IEA report, we know that the majority, or quite a lot of the technology that we'll need for net zero is still in this idea or prototype phase. So what we've done over the last 18 months, apart from refocus ourselves absolutely alongside the CCC ambitions, is that we did a report called Closing the Gap, where we did exactly that. We actually took ourselves to 2015, imagined what that would look like, and we published this report, which actually showed about what technologies we might need, but also what was the opportunity. You know, and so we're talking about, you know, things like, you know, really billions in terms of the opportunity for us here in the UK, and more jobs and more highly skilled jobs available as long as we can seize that opportunity. The thing that we've worked in, you know, and OGTC, as it was before, opened back in the doors in late 2016. The key for us that we've been working on is how do we actually get the technology adopted? So, you know, we've done over 250 projects, you know, and most of the work that we do now is what can we do to get the adoption? And since we've actually really repivoted our focus really on net zero, we find that has become a more important question, because there are great technologies out there, but they do need support and probably a change in mindset about when appropriate investment needs to happen for technology, so that it can progress into some of these great projects which are out there. So so that is what we've been working from, and it's really great to have this broader platform to talk about this, because even though we're bringing technology from our developers and entrepreneurs to the forefront, we really need to make sure we're accelerating that and giving them a chance to actually get this into projects and operations. So thank you.
Great. Thanks very much indeed, Myrtle. And what I'd like to do now is to ask Neil Golding, who is a Director of Market Intelligence at the EIC, just to tell us a little bit, Neil, if you would, about what you're doing at the EIC, and to the extent you can, to tell us about some of the organizations, some of them government organizations and programs that you are involved with in the background that are looking at this really, really tough subject and trying perhaps to help the supply chain step up and make sure that it within the UK gets its fair share of new work and new projects. Neil, would you like to tell us a little about that, please?
Of course I would, Andrew, and thank you ever so much for the introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. Firstly, the EIC, we of course delighted to be part of this group. We're slightly different. We're a trade association, and we are here to represent our member companies. That's why we want to be part of this financing technology net zero group. Now, members, I'm delighted, are part of the group already, Siemens and Wood, but a lot of our member companies are SMEs. And what is very clear is that there are permanent and real threats right now to the UK's energy supply chain, unless long-term capability and strategies are implemented to protect them. And so as a result of that, industry and government have agreed to come together, and we're part of that, in the form of a new UK energy supply chain task force group to mitigate those challenges that the SMEs and wider supply chain face. So what's clear is that the UK's energy supply chain needs a very clear seed and route plan to be developed and implemented in order to ensure healthy and viable capability to meet UK and, picking up on something that Mark said as well, export demands as well across all energy technologies. And this plan needs to engage with all key stakeholders across the increasingly integrated energy supply chain. Now, the task force will provide an amplified voice for the entire UK energy supply chain and a means for government to work directly with industry in a coordinated way that will help to deliver pace and scale of change, developing hopefully a coherent plan for UK clean growth over short, medium and long-term timescales, and all with the aim of helping to meet the UK's decarbonisation commitments and ambition. The group is co-chaired by the DIT Minister for Exports and the BEIS Energy Minister, and will link into each energy subsector, including oil and gas, civil nuclear, renewable, conventional power, energy transition and circular economy. and each strategic UK energy initiatives, such as the Hydrogen Advisory Group, the North Sea Transition Deal, and all of the industrial clusters. But we're not going to replicate those, instead complementing them. We'll also support wider initiatives such as the Green Industrial Revolution, Levelling Up Agenda, and the Build Back Better campaign. And it will be operational across all regions of the UK, recognising and taking account the work of the devolved regions as well. Now, EIC is Secretariat of UKES, together with partners including OG UK, the Nuclear Industry Association, Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, Renewable UK, CCSA, and the UK Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association. And we are currently undertaking a survey with the UK supply chain to get views on challenges, needs, and opportunities for them. And out of that survey, and one of the questions that's very relevant is that we've asked about access to finance. And of the respondees to date, 80% have said they are currently struggling to access finance, which is somewhat of a concern going forward, as John previously mentioned, and Myrtle also mentioned. The opportunities are vast, and without a supply chain to deliver these, it's going to be a huge challenge for us to meet 2050 targets. So I'll hand back to you, Andrew.
Yeah, Neil, thanks very much for those remarks. And yeah, Mark at the bank. I know you covered in our own chat one of the main focuses is the transition to net zero. I'd love you to just give us a minute or two on specifically on that and how that translates into what you're looking for in specific deals. You know, what your drivers are when you look to apply that particular metric, perhaps in the socialization phase, that very first phase of deals, when a deal first comes to you. Perhaps you could tell us just a little about that.
Sure. I'm going to touch on some of the deals that the bank's already undertaking, just very briefly. So it just as examples of sort of innovative solutions that can support net zero. We've invested in sort of tidal energy innovation, lower than zero carbon insulation for homes, and new forestry projects, electric vehicle charging, as well as heat storage technology. So we're across it all. In terms of bank support, a couple of things. First, there's a desire to support. You know, really want to get that across. A couple of things though to offset that, unfortunately. One, there is a limited pool of capital. It's unfortunate, but it's just reality. And then if I can touch on just four very brief themes around basically to try to be prepared, because what we don't want is don't give investors a reason to say no, and that includes the bank. So the four themes I would sort of quickly touch upon would be preparation. You know, it's not something people want to do, and it could be costly as well. You know, the involvement of advisors, the Net Zero Technology Centre's a great source. So don't sort of come with a couple of bits of paper and think, oh look, I've got a great idea and let me put this forward, and can I have £10 million, please? That is a very difficult proposition to work from. The second would be expectations. So be realistic in what can be achieved, as well as acknowledge the risk sharing that's required. I think that's quite a big point on risk sharing. Thirdly is the ecosystem's important. And I would say the supply chain, it's great to have Wood and Siemens on. These are big players who will have a huge part to play in this decarbonising journey. How they interact with the supply chains, how they're utilised, how they're treated, is really important as well. And Wood had a fantastic export finance facility announced earlier this year. And I'm sure Matt might want to, Keith might want to touch upon that, because that can feed through into some of the more newer technologies. And then finally, an acknowledgement at my end in terms of as investors, we can look at ourselves. You know, we can make it easier and more make it more accessible. To that end, it's probably around education from ourselves as much as anything else.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that. So you've heard from everybody with their initial thoughts about this. We've heard, very interestingly to me, we've heard, factual information from Neil that 80% of respondents to to a membership survey are saying that they are experiencing difficulties in accessing finance. And what I'd like to do is throw some questions at my panel, and don't forget that you as attendees are able to interact with us and send your questions in. We'll do our very best to answer those, and any that we can't get to, we'll try and answer post the event too. And of course, there's recording of the event available afterwards through the website. But Keith, I wonder if I could come to you first. Would Mark gave us a nice intro there to the recent funding round that you got, but you mentioned recently in one of our meetings that you're involved in some delivery for some of the majors, and there's beginning to be linkages in the delivery mechanisms, the contract mechanisms around decarbonisation, around things have to be decarbonised as part of delivery of contracts. And perhaps you could talk a little bit about that and about the role that you think innovation is going to play, whether it be innovative technology or innovative ways of doing things. It'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts about that.
Sure, Andrew. Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, let's start with the UKEF financing package. I guess that was the first of a kind in the Export Development Guarantee under a transition plan, and it did require Wood to make a number of commitments, not only to its own transition but also to the transition of people that are in the supply chain. And I guess that's illustrated not just by the comments that Mark made around that ecosystem. Finance doesn't happen in a vacuum. But it's also linked to the fact that we're never going to get there on our own. No one organisation, whether you're an asset owner, an engineering service provider, an ideas house or a finance house, you're not going to get there without relying on more than one party. And so Wood has commitments to, as part of its own transition target, to look within its supply chain. And I'll give you an illustration. Within that tier one supply chain, there's over 1,000 people that we use, and they're the biggest suppliers across a range of projects that we're working with at the moment to understand when a major client comes to Wood and says, as part of your value-led offer, how do you take or shoulder a share of my challenge in decarbonising my operations and my assets? Now, technology clearly has a role to play in that, because if this is talking about things like carbon capture, there is a piece of technology that can capture that carbon and a series of pipes that you can then use to transport that and potentially for deep geological sequestration. But actually, that's not the entire story. Part of the story to net zero involves things like, what are we going to do with the materials that we select to deliver the projects? How are we accounting for carbon in that material selection, which means engaging the supply chain that are producing those materials for you to actually start to think around innovative solutions. So it's not always just a big, grand piece of technology. There may well be technological developments within those supply chains which add significantly over a range of projects to actually being able to lower the carbon footprint of any asset, whether it be development, modification, decommissioning. And so I think that's really important. That ecosystem that we picked up as a group within the white paper and subsequent discussions is a really fundamental one. From the technologies that we've seen where there's a really good idea, where there's some backing for that idea with money, where there is a solution provider able to articulate how that idea fits within the ecosystem, and an asset owner that's, quite frankly, courageous enough to take that idea on and say, I'm prepared to put my asset up. That's where the magic happens, and that kind of almost alignment is fundamental to us reaching where we want to go, Andrew. And I think that involves taking a lot of people with us on that journey, whether you're a global engineering provider, an asset owner, or a utility or otherwise.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And Miranda, I'm interested too. Siemens Energy, major businesses, but clearly from your earlier remarks, making major moves to try and make sure you stay across the technologies that are emerging. Just a few remarks on what sort of pressures that you are under as businesses from from your own customers to help deliver decarbonise solutions, and the extent to which you think innovation and innovative technologies have roles to play in helping you deliver what you're being asked to deliver by your own customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can just reply to Keith's remarks, and I'm sure that maybe you're facing the same thing, Keith, that when we're looking at how we even report our emissions, right? So scope 1 is one thing, but we as a company, 96% of our emissions are scope 3. And so exactly what Keith was remarking on, that the entire value chain has to be on board, is not just a nice to have anymore, right? It's a necessity. Why? Because it's becoming perhaps more and more legally required, but more than anything, it's being required by our customers. And so we are a company that, you know, traditionally makes large gas turbines, and most of our revenue is now coming from that part of the portfolio. But we understand dramatically that will have to change, and it's going to have to change quicker than we probably would like it to, in at least employment ways. So what we're looking at as a business is, one, responding to not only the customers that we have right now that are demanding they need us to help them meet their customer expectations, and also regulatory environments. Just looking at the United States right now and the Biden administration, Build Back Better legislation coming down the road can hit faster than you expect. So our customers need to be ready for that, and they expect us to help them along that way. But it does mean that we need to be innovating very quickly and on a larger scale, so that we're not just taking a little chip of the puzzle and making big swings when it comes to helping our customers reduce CO2 emissions.
Yeah. Again, really interesting for me. And of course, in our sessions in Financing Technology to Net Zero Group, there are themes that emerge, and we've heard one or two of them mentioned by pretty much everybody. We've heard about risk levels and where risks should actually reside when you're trying to introduce technologies and get them adopted by markets and then get them funded. And we've heard a little bit about TRL levels from Myrtle, who's looking at levels between sort of 4 and 8-9 to invest in. John, what I'd love to hear from you, just some thinking around the risk levels that exist with earlier stage technologies, and perhaps some of the emerging thinking of our group as to where those risks should properly reside in order to get some funding into that. And just as an alert for everybody on the panel, I'd like to go on after John's reply to thinking about one or two things that we could ask from policymakers to do to help us on this. But that in a couple of minutes. John, first, you're thinking about the risk levels, where risks should reside for those earlier stage technologies.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. I think it's one of the key issues that has come out of the conversations that we've had while we've been preparing this white paper. As you know, we went through a whole process of what risks existed as you develop your project, and specifically the technology risk associated with. And of course, then you've got various players in project development who have differing levels of commercial capability to absorb such a risk. And that's from the end user. And we've all seen examples where the end user essentially absorbs all risk, but also to a small scale, fantastic idea, small technology provider. And on occasion, we've seen the amount of risk put onto that company has been so much as to render the whole project meaningless, because clearly that's not something that can. So until we find a happy medium, and I think it was something that you said, Andrew, it's resonated with me. Unless we assign the risk in the right place, it becomes meaningless. And I think that's a key part of developing technology and looking to find financiers right across the TRL spectrum. So I think, and again, one of the things we've talked about technology assessment, and again, in any times of extreme change, you've got to skate quickly across thin ice, and that's what you need to do. So how do you ensure that you have a wide net to capture as much of these nascent technologies as possible, but a process that allows you to adopt the winners and drop the losers as quickly as you can? And part of that is we think is going to be how do you underwrite that risk. And we think regulators and government has a part to play in that. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to do this quickly. Otherwise, and if you want to accelerate, you've got to find a way to ensure that your risk is mitigated.
Yeah, indeed. So I agree with that, John. I do think if risk ends up residing in the wrong place, it just kills a transaction completely. And that was something I was familiar with in the short time I was with the Renewable Energy Investment Fund, and you doing a similar thing to what Mark is doing at the bank. What I would like to do is ask Myrtle, being as you are probably more closely connected with branches of government perhaps than any, Myrtle, just to talk a little bit about our group's emerging thinking on policy consistency, and perhaps some sticks and some carrots that might be adopted to try and introduce that policy consistency and to support companies in their efforts to get technologies adopted and then funded. Myrtle.
Okay, thank you. So I suppose from where I'm sitting, I do see a lot of support from government, especially I think probably in the early stages. The issue that we have is how do we go from some of this early stage development into something which industry will adopt, which is slightly different. So there are a lot of things that have been developed over many years which haven't been adopted. So I think what I've seen in terms of what the government is trying to do at the moment is that they are looking to make sure that when they put money out there to support technology, that there is an industry link. And so, for example, at our company, we have to have an industry sponsor and at least a matched funding. And one of the things we try to do is to make sure that we have things going into field trials so that there is actually a need for the technology. So I think the government is trying to make sure that they're getting things which go pull through the technology readiness levels. I think if I move to things like policy, I sit on the delivery group for the North Sea Transition Deal. I sit on Asset Stewardship Forum. And what I do see is, from my perspective, the government taking a very keen interest in listening now to industry. So things like what's going to happen with the market? Do we have a market for this? How do we pull things end to end so that they make sense? And to be fair, how do we support some of these early projects, which we know will become commercial at some point, but are really struggling at the moment? How do we do that? And I do see that. But again, the government's focus, I think, is correct on the just transition. I think a focus on making sure that the things only they can deliver, the market, the regulations, the legislation, things like making sure that the HSE issues are resolved so we don't get to the end of it and then find out that we can't get things approved. I see that there is activity here. I'll always say do more, but I'd say that to all of the efforts that we're putting on the table.
Yeah, Myrtle, for what it's worth, I agree with your view that actually there is a lot of help out there. I don't subscribe to the view that governments are doing little or nothing. I think there is a lot. Clearly, as you said, more could be done. I think Neil at the EIC, you have a vast membership, and some on the call here now. Some are big businesses, some are smaller businesses. I guess you must hear from them, fairly regularly about government policies and what governments could perhaps do to help them, both large and small, participate in the energy transition, make sure that their businesses can bid for and potentially win contracts and grow and employ more people. What sort of things do you hear, Neil? And in terms of the interactions you have clearly at high level with governments on behalf of your members, what sense do you get back from those interactions that the government is listening to this and is indeed, as Myrtle suggests, actually trying to do a good job?
I'll tackle the latter question first around the government, and actually they're listening, and actually that's something certainly from a supply chain perspective we've not really seen before, and so they're willing to listen and to learn, more importantly, about what some of those key challenges are going forward. And what we're hearing from a lot of our members who are traditionally oil and gas based is that it's going to take them 5, maybe 10 years to pivot into these new clean tech sectors. So they do need the oil and gas industry still to be going and moving forward. And there has to, of course, be the decarbonisation element to that. But the withdrawal of support that we've seen from the likes of UK Export Finance and perhaps other banks in terms of supporting oil and gas projects globally has had a bit of a knock-on effect on our member companies. But on top of that, what we're also hearing is that there's a requirement for more to do around R&D tax credits. Is there availability for technology grants? And also, what about transition training? There needs to be grants around that side of things. We're not just talking about innovation here, but people also need to be moving over. So there's also that financing element. And of course, with good people come good technology as well. So I think there's just the government have done enough, and I'm with Myrtle here. They could do more, of course, as always, but they are at least putting money in the right place, and there's all these hundreds of millions of pounds now in terms of all of the various different competitions that are being put forward. So I think it's just now pipeline of opportunities and those projects becoming real.
Yeah,
that's what we need to do now.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to hear from somebody who's directly engaged, not perhaps daily, but certainly weekly and definitely monthly with government, that they are listening. That is a strong message, particularly when it's delivered from a membership organisation, which has a real job to make sure its wide range of members is well represented. So one of the other things I'd like to kind of throw at you all, and I'd like you to be reasonably brief in your responses to this one, because then I want to give each of you a sentence or two to say what you would like to see to help this critical issue of there's 1 billion seconds left, and I haven't credited Siemens Energy, who I believe came up with that phrase, or at least potentially stole it from somebody else, as I duly did. I think it's a fantastic phrase. But what I'd like you to think about now is that sentence or two, something you would like to see, some remark you'd like to make about that. But before we get to that, what I'd like to do is just ask you, what you think is the biggest issue in transitioning to net zero, perhaps for let's say the offshore oil and gas sector as an example. What kind of issues are there in front of them that we could potentially help with? And John, given your background and some of your colleagues I've met virtually background from that sector, what's your thinking about that?
Yeah, that is quite interesting. I think that there's several things. One, what can you be doing tomorrow, to drive us to and getting that visibility? I think there are two key concerns. One is that if we simply leave it to market forces, we're not going to move quickly enough. If just solely left to the market, because there are still, we're all talking hydrogen, there isn't sufficient visibility of a huge pipeline that will drive the investment by all of our supply chain into that space. So I think that needs. Now, does that mean regulation? I think we were in a discussion about direct heat and direct heat in households. Well, do you need something like regulation to make sure that there are no new builds without that? And then that creates a market and a real push forward. So it is one thing to be committed to net zero 2050. There's another thing to really take it by the throat and say, this is how it's going to go. And the third one is to engage everybody else, because frankly, oil and gas is the bad kid in this drama. So at the moment, and yet we're not demanding consumer behavioral change, which is going to be fundamentally required to drive to 2050. So I think we need to start looking at how do we engage the much broader population to reach these goals.
Yeah, indeed. Remarks with which I agree, and I'll perhaps reserve my position as chair to make in my closing remarks. I might just touch on those very points. So look, everybody, we've reached that point where I have to ask you all for just a sentence or two about this topic, about this issue. I intend to go back to the order in asking that I used at the start, if you can remember what that was. Fortunately, I can. So that's the most important thing, I guess. So Miranda, I think you kicked off with some opening remarks. Could you let us know, just in a sentence or two, literally, what you think of this issue and what you'd like to see?
I mean, I will talk, but everyone will say things that I will all completely agree with. The first one is collaboration, and I think this group is just the star child of what that looks like. Coming together with different expertise from across the industry to, more than anything, get out of your own echo chamber and to understand what this transition needs, and to be open to that collaboration, whatever it looks like. If it looks like our group, if it looks like something else, I think that is going to be key for all of us getting through this together. And then secondly, mitigating risk is, in terms of my perspective from Siemens Energy and just looking internally, what can you be investing in and how small can you be investing so that you're testing quickly and failing fast? I know that doesn't work for all technologies, but it will work for some, and that needs to be happening at expedited speed. So
yeah, okay, excellent. Thank you very much for that, Miranda. And Keith, you were next up. What are your kind of closing thoughts about all of this?
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, I've got three things I think on my mind, really, Andrew. One, we've not really mentioned it today. We've talked about government interventions, the support, but actually a lot of the investment needs to be made in a stable environment. So regulation is really key, as well as really clear policies. I don't think everybody has all the answers to everything today, but creating those clear policies and understanding what needs to change in the regulatory landscape to create surety, particularly when we're talking about things like hydrogen and end use of hydrogen with all of the myriad of different standards that exist, there needs to be real thought on that. The second, I think, is the scale of the challenge. This is a massive, everybody knows how big it is and how complex it is, but a lot of the companies that we sort of see as being progressive frontrunners have at least acknowledged the scale of that challenge. And they've gone one step further and said, okay, so we know this is big. We know we can't solve it ourselves. We're going to have to ask for help. And they do that by looking into the supply chain for solutions, by creating that pull on the ideas, but also fostering the right conditions. So that's not penalizing innovation. That's encouraging innovation from its procurement standards, making sure that creative thinking is actually valued as part of any competitive process. And I guess the final piece for me would be around, we've talked about risk, and I guess it's just a clarion call to say risk is an incredibly important thing to think about, but it can't create paralysis on progression. And, we were about the last 12 months of our discussions have been about as much net zero being perceived as an opportunity as it is about being perceived as a risk management exercise. Both of them have to be in balance.
Yeah, really important point. So far we've heard about collaboration. We've heard about mitigating risk. We've heard about clear policies and scale and the supply chain and about seeing net zero as a balanced thing between risk and opportunity. And John, what you're doing day to day involves to some extent helping businesses large and small have a look at those issues. So a couple more thoughts from you on what you think is crucial in this area.
Yeah, one of the key things that we're putting together for the white paper is how do we close the gap between TRL and financial institution. You recall we've talked to a large number of financial institutions while we're putting this white paper together, and we got a sense that some of them were just going to play in a business as usual environment. I remember one of the largest financial institutions saying, we're not going to invest in technology, we're only going to focus on projects. If we don't have a shift, then again, we're not going to have the right finance necessarily in the right place at the right time. So how do we create an environment that accelerates? And so one of the things we'll be looking at is how do we create that environment to encourage earlier investment from institutions that would not normally have done that, and what that would need and what it would look like to move this whole process forward.
Yeah, excellent comments. And Neil, from the EIC's perspective, King for a day, what would you look for if there was only one thing you could look for on behalf of your members?
Look, the supply chain is agile, it adapts, and it's capable of supporting the huge energy industries, and we've seen that with oil and gas, right?
Yep.
But the UK supply chain isn't able to diversify into technologies which are not yet up and running at scale to provide a regular pipeline of work. So really, it's just fund more pace and scale and consistency of the UK energy transition projects. Let's get moving quickly.
Excellent. Well, very, very focused response. And Mark, at the bank, you were kind enough to spend some time at the top of the session with me, just elucidating what you were doing and what your aims are. Just focusing for now on the net zero challenge. From the bank's perspective, what are you looking to achieve in that specific area with the mechanisms at your disposal?
I think I go back to the bank being a patient investor, Andrew. That's probably the strongest tool we can have. That we can try and sort of show patience. We don't have sort of artificial 2-year timelines for things to sort of commercialized. So if we can sort of live to that patience, then I think we have a part to play.
Yeah, excellent. Listen, all of you, I really do appreciate everything you've said. Of course, I have not asked Myrtle yet what her closing remarks are. So, Myrtle, if you were looking for one thing on behalf of the constituency that you have and all the tools at your disposal, what would you be looking to achieve with that?
So definitely to pick up the pace, and also for us to have a risk appetite that allows for a little bit of failure, so that we can move on and actually develop the technology we need, because we definitely need it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And may I take this opportunity of thanking every single one of you for agreeing to join in the panel and contributing in the way you have. I'd like to use my position as chair just to make one observation. One of the areas we've touched on in our discussions we didn't get to today was hinted at by John earlier, and that is a change in consumer behaviours, a very critical issue. Look, I would encourage everybody listening to watch and listen again to this. Please visit the Financing Technology to Net Zero site on LinkedIn. You'll see a video of what we're all about there, and you'll be able to participate in our questionnaire there, and we would really encourage you to do that, to give us all the feedback you need. I hope you've enjoyed the session. We've certainly enjoyed it. thanks to the All Energy team, and thanks to all of the All Energy sponsors for hosting the session. We very much appreciate all of that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.